Joining us today on the summit is Dr. Debra Greene from Maui, from beautiful Maui. She's a leader, she's an energy worker, a healer, and a PhD, and she helps people basically transform the world around them. Dr. Debra Greene, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Josh. It's a pleasure.
Now, you and I are, just for the letting everyone else know, in on our conversation, we've been having a conversation on this for about 6 months, and you're part of the team for the summit. You're a part of the new platform that's evolving and growing out of the summit, in which we're coming together in community. And you're really a bridge between the inner process and the outer reality. I mean, for each of us. So we'll dive into that in as much as it aligns with, it does align with our intention to shift this conversation around 5G and ensure safe technologies, prevent harmful technologies. That's why we're here. So we're going to give people resources today from your incredible repertoire and toolbox for the inner process, the inner empowerment, and everything that's associated with. So I'm just going to pause now and introduce your background to our audience, and then we'll dive right in. So, Doctor, I'm sorry, I didn't let you say. Did you want to say anything before we get started?
No, thank you. We're good.
I'm a little long-winded. I'll try to be concise. Dr. Debra Greene is an author, presenter, educator, and practitioner who specializes in energy therapies and mind-body integration. She combines the best of ancient wisdom with modern science in her private practice, writings, lectures, and online courses. After earning her PhD from Ohio State University in 1995, she's worked with thousands of clients, written dozens of papers, and given hundreds of lectures worldwide. And as a community organizer, she founded keepyourpower.org, great name, focused on preventing the rollouts of 5G and other harmful technology in Hawaii. So your work, again, is about bridging the inner and the outer, the internal senses and the external senses. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, Josh, just as we have like external senses that orient us to the external world, like seeing and hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, those senses help us navigate the external world. And just like we have those external senses, we also have internal senses that help us orient to our inner world and that help us navigate inside of us. And these internal senses are things like attention, what you choose to focus your attention on, that's determined inside of you. So attention is one of our internal senses. And then another internal sense is intention, which is basically attention, what we choose to focus on, infused with will. When you're intending something, you're focusing your whole attention on it, and you're also desiring a particular outcome. So you're willing something to happen. So intention is another example of an internal sense. Visualization is another one. We all have the capacity to make pictures, inside our heads, to imagine something. So visualization is part of our internal senses. And another one is self-talk, how we talk to ourselves. And we all do talk to ourselves, whether we want to admit it or not, we do. And that's one of our inner resources. Another one is self-sensing, which refers to our ability to sense what's going on inside our whole body. We can sense different organ systems, we can sense intuitive insights, we can have our capacity to, focus our self-sensing or to have it encompass our whole body. And another final internal sense that I'll mention is self-observation. And that refers to our ability to basically do everything that I just mentioned. When you become aware, when you observe what you're focusing your attention on, when you're aware of what you're visualizing, when you become aware, you observe how you're talking to yourself, that capacity of self-observation is part of our inner resources. And we could say that self-observation is like awareness, like awareness itself, because it allows us to, take in all of those other internal senses that I mentioned. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Cool. So there's intention, visualization, self-talk, self-sensing, and self-observation.
Yes,
So
and the first one was attention.
attention and also intention.
Right. And they're different, right?
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's great to have that model. Now, how does that directly connect with our intention to shift the conversation around 5G, for example?
Yes. Well, one of the things that happens with technology, cell phones in particular, is that they tend to pull us outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And they tend to be like a constant companion that's pulling our attention outside of us. Pre-cell phone age, it used to be that we had time for ourselves. For example, if we were waiting in line somewhere, we would just have that time to sort of, turn inward and reflect on ourselves.
And process our life, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And whereas now, if you're waiting in line, so many people tend to just whip out their cell phone, even, looking at their cell phone when they're waiting at a stoplight. Or, if you're waiting for a friend to meet you, instead of just being quiet, going inward, reflecting, processing, no, we're pulled outside of ourselves. And another example is, falling asleep at night. We used to just kind of drift off to sleep and maybe have time to reflect on our day and, discover things about ourselves. But so many people these days, they're on the cell phone until they can't keep their eyes open anymore, and then they fall asleep. And if they happen to wake up in the middle of the night, they grab the cell phone to check and see. And so we're constantly being pulled outside of ourselves. And that's a really serious thing, because what happens is it results in a loss of identity. Like if I'm always being pulled outside myself, I become determined by all of those external things, the fads and fashions, the bullying, everything that's going on outside of me tends to influence me. And I'm not connected and anchored inside myself. I don't know who I am. Yeah. And that loss of identity is huge, because who am I? That's a fundamental question that most people spend their whole lives with. Who am I? Who am I really? And there's plenty of examples of people who have achieved, fame and fortune and, raised fabulous families and done everything to be so-called successful, but they realize that they don't feel good inside. They're not really happy. There's an emptiness. There's a vacancy. And that kind of vacancy cannot be filled by things outside of us in the material world. It has to come from inside of us, from within. And identity, who am I, is an inside job. Yeah. The other problem with being pulled outside of ourselves and this loss of identity is that constantly being externally focused, in the material world, it separates us from our internal senses, those senses that I just talked about. And those internal senses are powerful, powerful internal resources that we all possess. And those internal senses, those internal resources can have a huge impact on the external world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like, it reminds me of a teacher I studied, from for a bit, named Dion Vamal. He talked about the whole thing, the whole key is going from being pulsed upon by the world or by your environment, like literally from wireless in this case, but just in general, being pulsed upon by the external, to pulsing upon our environment, to us being the agent of effect of change. And so it makes sense when you talk about it like that. It's like if we're externally hyperstimulated and always needing to do something or always needing to be busy or like being, just stimulated our senses in the external, then that's producing this barrenness internally. Why is it, do you think, that we're so drawn to external stimuli and to things like tech addiction and checking our phone in the middle of the night? What do we fear or is it a fear thing? Why don't we actually have a more powerful natural instinct just to be still and be with ourselves?
Well, for starters, I think a lot of technology is designed to be highly addictive. And so, we have that going against us because by design, it's meant to be addictive and keep us going back for more over and over again. I also think that we're kind of susceptible to things like that because let's face it, when most of us turn inside and spend time with ourselves, sometimes it's challenging, sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's challenging to be with yourself because it's not always pleasant inside there. Yeah, I mean, fears, yes, that's one aspect of it, but insecurities and guilt, and I mean, the list could go on and on, right? Disappointments and regrets, and on and on and on it goes. There's no shortage of those kinds of distortions, so to speak, inside of us, and so it's not always a pleasant journey in there, but it's very crucially important to take that step. And yeah, because again, that's how we can really find out who we are, by connecting inside. And it's also how we connect with something greater, than ourselves. I mean, we could say that time spent with yourself is actually time spent with God or creator or divine intelligence or universal source or whatever word you want to use to describe that, because that is not the bearded white man in the sky, that actually lives inside of us. And so that's how we can connect inside with, to connect with that by going in, because in is up dimensionally.
Mm-hmm. And that's the true power to do anything, to affect change in our life or to have an enjoyable life or anything. That's the true power, right?
Yes, absolutely it is. And I wondered I keep talking about these internal resources and internal senses and how powerful they are. And I wondered, would it be okay if I
walk us through something? Yes.
Can I do that?
Yeah, please.
Because it can really help us, when we experience something, it can really help us to understand, these concepts that I'm talking about. So if you want to participate in this exercise, those of you who are watching, please do. Don't try this while you're driving, because we need your hands. Your hands are part of this exercise. And Josh, if you want to participate, please do.
Definitely.
So in order to do the exercise, I'd like you to take your hands and to put them in front of you. I'm hoping you can see this on the screen. Maybe I'll go like that. Yeah, and I want you to put your hands together, side by side.
All right.
Oh, this is so interesting. It's like a mirror, right? So we're putting our hands together side by side like this. And if you look at the base of your palm, you're going to see that there are some creases there. Creases at the base of your palm. Do you see those?
Mm-hmm.
I want you to line up your two hands using those creases as markers. So we use the creases at the base of the palm by markers. We line them up. And then I want you to fold your hands together into prayer position and look at your two hands. Just observe right now are your two hands the same size or not? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. Some people's hands are different sizes. Some people's feet are different sizes. So, are your fingers and thumbs the same size? Your palm, how do your two palms compare? So we're just observing that right now and making a mental note about the size of these two hands compared to each other after we've used those lines, those creases at the base of the palm as markers and folded our hands together. So when you have a sense of that, allow one of your hands to drop away. It doesn't matter which hand. Just keep one hand in front of you and allow the other hand to just, drop away. And with this chosen hand in front of you, I want you to focus your whole attention on this chosen hand. And for the duration of the exercise, if you could please keep your attention fully focused on this hand. And it's helpful if you close your eyes, because it's easier to actually focus with your eyes closed, because then we don't get distracted. The eyes tend to pull us outside, visually outside of ourselves. So close your eyes and focus your whole attention on the chosen hand.
Okay.
And the first thing I'd like you to do is to send a clear message to this hand. And the message that I want you to send to this hand is that this hand has actually grown to be a very big hand. The hand has grown large. The hand has grown to be this enormous, gargantuan hand. Massive, it's huge. So I want you to send that message to the hand, to your hand. And the next step is to actually visualize your hand in your mind's eye, to see that your hand has grown to be so large. Your fingers are extending out into space. Your palm is thick and wide. Your hand has grown to be this enormous, massive hand.
Like the Incredible Hulk.
Exactly. It's an Incredible Hulk hand. And in fact, your hand has grown to be so big, so huge, that you can actually feel the weight of this hand. It's hard for you to even hold it up because it feels so heavy because of its enormity. I'm going to be silent for just a few moments so that you can continue to send these messages to the hand without having to listen to me or perhaps be distracted by my voice. Just continue to focus on your hand and send these messages and visualize and feel, sense how large the hand has become. All right. Should we do our after comparison? Whenever that feels complete, you can open your eyes and, using those creases at the palm of your hand as markers, put your two hands back together, line them up, put your hands back together, and tell me if you notice any difference.
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger. I would say at least a few millimeters bigger than the other one.
That's excellent. So maybe because I've done this exercise so many times, you can see how my hands have turned out.
You got to start doing the other one.
I know, right? So I have facilitated this exercise for groups of people from all walks of life, groups of all different sizes. And the exercise always works for at least 85% of the people, oftentimes more. But at least 85% of the people are able to physically grow their hand simply by taking a few minutes to do what? All we did was activate our inner resources. We used our internal senses. We focused our awareness, that's attention, right, that we talked about. Then we intended for the hand to grow larger, so we used intention. And then we sent the message through our self-talk, and then we visualized the hand being large, and then we did self-sensing. We felt it. We sensed the hand being large. And if just by taking those few moments, you're able to physically grow your hand, to alter physical reality in that way, imagine what's possible.
That's cool. So this like an internalizing the power of suggestion, right? So how can we take these principles and take the internal resources and then apply them?
Well, for starters, it's very important to make sure that inside yourself that you have coherence, because things like intention work much better when we have internal coherence. And by coherent, I'm not talking about, can I understand you or not? Are you coherent in your speech? I'm talking about having yourself aligned and attuned internally, so that, I guess we could say in energy terms, you're vibrating at a higher frequency, or there's a harmony, there's a uniformity inside of you. And most of us don't have that, I mean, let's face it. Most of us, have blockages, we have limiting beliefs, we have, fears, we have programmed behaviors, we have emotional patterns, we have shadow stuff, we have all kinds of stuff. And so sometimes people, ask me, well, why doesn't intention always work?
Yeah.
If it's so powerful, which in fact, I mean, intention is really, really powerful. And it's extremely well researched, by the way. I mean, there's literally hundreds of research studies that confirm the effects of human intent on, for example, living things like other humans and animals, insects, plants, bacteria, yeasts, cancer cells. DNA has been shown to be affected by human intent. Also inanimate objects like electronic devices and computers, and my favorite, chocolate. Dean Radin, who's the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, he actually did some research infusing chocolate with specific intention, and it actually worked. He's also headed up some research on infusing tea with intention, and that also works. And the other interesting thing about intention is that it doesn't matter distance. From a few feet to thousands of miles doesn't matter. That does not limit the effects of intention. And there's also been some really interesting research done on intention affecting the future. Yeah, it's a fascinating field of study, and being legitimized by some very rigorous research that's being done. So how can we apply this to 5G, or our quest to have a safer world with safer technology?
Yes.
I mean, I would say that step one is to use your internal senses, and pay attention to what you pay attention to, because attention itself is a very, very powerful inner resource. And we don't have to go too far into quantum physics, for example, to understand how that works, because in quantum physics there is this phenomena called the observer effect. And basically what it means is that what we observe, what we focus our attention on, actually brings reality to life. I mean, we know from quantum physics that so-called reality is not fixed, right? It's potential.
Yeah.
Reality exists as pure potentiality, as
Our
Deepak
observation
Chopra would
kind
say.
of
Our observation kind of brings it from a multi-position to like a defined reality, right? So the observer can never be completely separate from the experiment.
Correct. And what that means for us in real life is that what you observe, what you choose to pay attention to, actually actualizes reality. It brings reality into existence. It moves it from a state of being a potential to being actualized or realized. Mm-hmm. How powerful is that? And I mean, if you stop and think about that, it's really quite mind-blowing.
Well, I want to jump into that, because like so you're saying that what we put our attention to grows. If we put our attention on like a double negative or something like stop 5G, does that inherently create more resistance? And like, how can we actually, and secondly, we're being made aware of this big agenda that's apparently very clearly, I would say, causing a lot of harm. So by default, we, number one, our consciousness goes on the problem. And number two, it kind of goes into a place of fear, right? Like you and I have worked together on several personal sessions, and you're helping me, I'll just share with the audience. I don't mind, to a considerable level, like process some of these fears about like being outspoken about this, about like challenging authority, about like actually, respecting and honoring myself, not giving myself away. So in light of like all of the heaviness of 5G and these topics, this problem coming into our attention, how can we actually use the tools that you're talking about to create what we want, rather than just to make the problem bigger, if what you're saying is that what we put our attention on expands?
Yes, well, it's the intention will carry it. And it's not so much about words, like stop 5G, although words are important. They're containers of energy and information, so they are important. But I guess the intention will carry it. And so we have to pay attention to what our intention is, right, with regard to this.
Right? Stay connected. Don't lose ourselves in the problem and spiral out or go into fear, is what you're saying, right?
Yes. Or, sometimes we can get into a space of replicating what it is that we're trying to eliminate, right? So, I mean, if I think about 5G and somebody who's a proponent of it, they might be a proponent of 5G because they're operating out of greed, or they're operating out of power, a desire for power, or perhaps they just don't know, perhaps they're just ignorant. And so I have to pay attention to not participating in that with my own ignorance, mm-hmm. with my own desire for power, with my own greed, to whatever, greed to have, I want more and more and more people on board with this issue. I mean, that could be a form of greed, right? And the answer to that question lies within. Like, what is my intention? What is my intention here? What is motivating me? Does that make sense?
It does. And also, I just want to kind of follow that up. Like, when those triggers do come, when I feel like lower vitality or irritated or whatever, or triggered in some way, fears come up or whatever, do you have any practical tools or guidance for shifting out of that kind of perspective, or modality?
Yes. So, I mean, let's talk about fear, for example, because it's easy to go there, particularly with this issue. And I mean, okay, so we talked about intention, that's important, but there is this thing called spiritual bypassing, right? Where it's like, if I'm just exuding love and light all the time, then that's the answer. And actually it's not. The answer when it comes to feelings like fear or other emotions is to actually allow yourself to feel them. Mm. Because feelings are meant to be felt. That's the whole purpose of their existence. And a lot of us have a very difficult time feeling our feelings because it's uncomfortable, because we've been trained not to, because we want to go up inside our head and try to think it through, figure something out. And that's the interesting thing about feelings and emotions, is that you can't really figure them out because it can't happen on the mental level. It has to happen on the emotional level because feelings exist on the emotional level. Or if we want to use, energy terms, we could say the emotional body.
Is it in our physical body? Are you saying feelings exist at a location in our physical body, or how does that work?
Sometimes they do, but the physical body is a distinct frequency domain, so to speak, and it's distinct from the emotional body. I mean, you can see the physical body under a microscope. You cannot see emotions under the microscope. We know they exist because we all experience them for sure, but you can't see an emotion under the microscope. So it's a different, frequency domain. It's a different type of energy. And because it is that type of energy, feelings need to be felt. But so let's use an example. The physical body has its own built-in healing process. Let's say, okay, we're having this interview and I grab this piece of paper and I get a paper cut. I cut my finger, maybe it's a pretty bad paper cut. So I cut my finger, and what's going to happen? Well, it's going to hurt. And then it's going to bleed, it's going to be messy for a while. But if I leave it alone, eventually a scab will form, right? And it's not going to look pretty, but it will form this scab. And if I leave it alone and allow the natural healing process to happen, eventually the scab is going to fall off and you won't even be able to tell that anything was there. You won't be able to tell that there was even a wound. The emotional body has its own natural healing process. Emotions, feelings need to be felt and expressed. That is their natural healing process. And if emotions are felt and expressed, they tend to complete. They tend to complete, and so there's not residue. And you can see this a lot in children because oftentimes, children are quite expressive. And, if they're upset, they're going to show it. If they're sad, they're going to cry. If they're afraid, they're going to tremble. And if they're allowed to express in that way, 2 minutes later, they're off playing with a new toy.
Yeah.
It's over.
How important?
It's complete.
How important is it that the way that we express emotion?
Well, it's very important because I am certainly not advocating that we all, scream and cry and yell,
Or take up boxing or something, or like kickboxing. Well, that could help too, right? I mean, getting it out physically and.
It can, but it can't, and that's a very important question because, like, those kinds of physical activities, they happen on the physical level, but it's not necessarily addressing what's going on the emotional level.
Okay, yeah.
So again, the key to emotional health and hygiene is to be aware of what you're feeling, feel your feelings, and then allow the feeling or emotion to express. And by expression, I do not mean acting out your feelings. I do not mean that we all become drama queens, okay? That's not what this is. You can.
Thank you.
Yes, right? You can express your feelings even with a word. I feel sad. I feel afraid. I feel angry. And as long as those three components are there, you're aware of what you're feeling the feeling, and then simply by putting a word to it, it helps to release. It helps to release the feeling. There's actually some very interesting research that's been done on just that. That naming your feelings with feeling words, and it has to be a feeling word. You can't say, I feel terrible, because terrible does not name a feeling, right? You can't say, I'm feeling upset, because that's not a feeling. It needs to be, are you mad? Are you frustrated? Are you afraid? Are you in grief? Are you just, those are feeling words, right?
Yeah.
There's something about finding the right feeling word. It's like a lock and key. And the research shows that when you find the word to describe your inner emotional state, that the emotion simply releases. And they've tested this by testing our brain activity. And it's really, really interesting. So no, we don't need to become drama queens.
I can relate to that, like just having a conversation with someone, or you're kind of getting into it, and then you get to that level of depth in the conversation where you say something that has the ring of truth in it, and you feel this rush of emotion or this rush of energy, right? That's what you're talking
Yes,
about. Like just
then it releases. Yeah, it
and then it releases.
expresses, it releases, and then we reset. Yep.
So can that happen in something like, we're dealing with 5G, we want to communicate how we're feeling and what we feel needs to happen, let's say, to members in our society, like elected officials or like corporate executives or commissions or whatever. Can we actually like channel that kind of communication, that kind of feeling communication in like a written letter or an email or like a phone? Well, I guess a phone call is verbal, so yes, but talk about how that might relate into this advocacy world.
Well, I'm actually talking here more about
the internal process first.
Talking about, I guess you could say, self-work. I don't really like the word work when we talk about ourselves, because like self-fun, how to play with yourself, okay? Self-play,
yes.
Self-exploration, self-engagement, engaging with yourself. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking so much about translating that directly into, that type of communication.
Okay, forgive my impatience.
I understand it. I totally get it. And I've got it too. But the thing is the more that we are well resourced inside, the more coherent we are, the more we have done this type of engagement with ourselves, the more empowered we are, the better we're going to be able to act in the world. And it works that way, We're going to be so much more effective in the world. So it automatically has an effect on the external when we do this internal work. And, the other fascinating thing is that when we do this inner type of work, we help to uplift everyone, because we are all connected, right? We're all connected inside. And so it isn't just me here in my little, bubble, working so hard on myself. But when I transform something inside myself, I help to uplift all of humanity. I help make it easier for everyone to do that, because we're all connected inside.
Right. Yeah. That's beautiful. I agree.
Yeah. And so I also want to make a little distinction here between, I'm talking about self-engagement, and I want to make a distinction between self-care and spending time with yourself.
I was thinking about that earlier when you're talking about the key is, time with yourself, right? So like, what does that exactly, mean? And is it like I like to go to nature, right? Spend time in nature, and I just feel recharged that way, or body work, or reading a book, or watching a movie or something. Is that what you're talking about, or is there, different?
Well, there actually is an important distinction there. And self-care is important. I don't mean to discount it at all, but there is a difference between self-care versus spending time with yourself. When I'm doing self-care, I'm oftentimes doing the things that you just named, watching a favorite movie, getting into a good book, or, going for a walk, or doing something out in nature. And it's kind of activity oriented. But when I'm spending time with myself, it's not so much about the activity, it's more about engaging inside. And maybe an example of that subtle but important distinction is, if you have a friend, or maybe, a spouse, or a girlfriend, boyfriend, lover, whatever, you can spend time with that loved one doing activities, riding bike and going to movies and doing all these fun things. Or you can spend time with that person where you're just focused on that person. And there's a big difference between the two, right? And children especially are very sensitive to this. They know when we have our attention focused on them, or if we're focused on, something. And pets, that's another one. Especially cats, maybe dogs too. But it's like they want our attention. And if we're reading, a magazine or a newspaper or on the computer, oftentimes the cat will come and sit right on the keyboard or block the screen, right? Because they want that attention, because they know that there's a quality of energy there when we are focusing our attention in a certain way. And so that quality of attention is what we need to give ourselves, where we're focusing our whole attention on ourselves without, the extraneous activities. You could call it, something like daydreaming if you want. And the research actually shows that daydreaming is very good for us. It's very healthy for us. And most of us, again, don't have an opportunity to do that anymore because we're always, looking at a device.
A dot I'm connecting here is that help me understand or clarify this. If I'm focused attention, if I give myself that time of focused attention, then it seems logically I would be less inclined to try to get my needs met from whatever outside of myself, because that's like you said, it's an inside job, right? So whether it's like food or sex or technology or addiction or like people, like recognition from people, or like any kind of physical or emotional need, perhaps. Well, physical needs, maybe we still need to eat food and stuff like that. But do you want to say anything? Is that accurate? And do you want to say anything else about that?
Yes, I completely agree with that. And it's by spending time with ourselves in that kind of focused manner, getting to know ourselves inside. That's what is going to bring us true, lasting happiness. That's what's going to bring us fulfillment. That's what's going to bring us peace. Those things don't exist out here. They exist in here. And once you have cultivated that inside yourself, it makes all the difference for how we're engaging with the world. And yes, it makes us, I guess you could say, more trigger proof and bulletproof, so to speak, where we don't get rocked off of our center when something external is needs to be dealt with. We're able to respond to life in any myriad of ways because we're coming from a place of that inner grounding. It's more than grounding, but I hope you understand what I'm saying.
So no, I do. So that kind of like self-love, it's not that we love ourselves, that we serve ourselves. It's that we're doing it on a different level. Like we're actually authentically loving ourselves rather than, you could say like, what's the word? We're just self-gratifying. It's not self-gratifying, right? It's loving yourself on a higher level so that then you can show up in the world better, right? So something else I noticed when you're talking is like, I was thinking like this, when I do this, it actually increases my motivation, my why to show up and to actually take on the challenges and to feel better about doing what is aligned with right, what I feel to be right, without attachment to control the outcome.
Exactly. And it puts us, it puts us into a different headspace, for lack of a different term. We're coming from a different place. And, if our mind has different aspects to it. And if we are using what's sometimes called the lower mind or the concrete mind, we're very much in thinking mode, trying to figure things out. and trying to strategize and use the rational mind for all these things. But if we're able to engage our higher mind, it puts us in a different place where we're able to see a bigger picture. We're able to observe things from a larger perspective. And sometimes I refer to this as director's mode. You might appreciate this as a filmmaker. It's like we could observe, life as a movie. And we always have a choice. We can either star in the movie or we can be directing the movie. We always have that choice. And if you're starring in the movie, then you're in it. You're in the trauma drama, you're in, you're just in it, right? But if you're directing the movie, you're sitting in the director's chair and you're watching everything, you're watching all the action, but you have access not only to that, but so much more as the director. You know what's going to happen with all of the characters, the actors. You know what's going to happen next because you can see the bigger picture. And so going into director's mode, using that capacity of the higher mind can be really helpful when it comes to dealing with, issues like 5G. And if you want a concrete example of that, we can do a tiny little experiment where just close your eyes for a moment and try to think yes and no at the same time. So we close our eyes and we're going to try to think yes and no at the same time. And it usually doesn't take long to realize that we can't. I mean, we can think yes and no really, really fast, but in order to preserve the integrity of the thought, it has to be one or the other, right? But if I ask you to be aware of yes and no at the same time, so close your eyes and be aware of yes and no at the same time.
Yeah, they kind of delineate.
You can do that, right?
More easily anyways, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a tiny little example of the difference between being in your concrete mind versus being in the higher mind, the abstract mind. It allows us to see things that are seemingly contradictory, but we can see them both at the same time. Yeah. And we're not stuck in that black and white, that back and forth kind of thing.
So it's observing. So in some cases, you're talking about observing rather than trying to force. But in the whole, you're talking about being in a position of directing your life. Your inner. So this is really you could say like a crash course in spiritual sovereignty or self-determinism.
Yes.
Self-determinism that is not about self-aggrandizement or self-gratification, but is about the self, if we identify self as the self that is actually connected with the all through whatever your belief system, like for me, I see it's like a holographic fractal. You're connected with the source of all. So that's really what we're talking about here, right? Is we're like connecting within and clearing out the illusion, and then connecting to that true source of power, that source of life and love, so that we can actually authentically direct our life. And then what we say and the actions we take in the world is something that I've noticed on my limited journey, let's say, in the time that I've kind of gone deeper into this internal work. When we act and when we do and when we speak from that place, like you say, almost like less effort. We're putting out less effort and we're getting more result, right?
Exactly. We can be so much more effective. Yes. And there's also more synchronicities that happen.
Yes. Yeah.
It's much easier to manifest. Things become effortless. They seem to flow. You can set an intention and then suddenly things will appear to meet whatever that is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for this, overview and what I would say intentional living or intentional advocacy, bridging these two worlds. So this is something just for our viewers out there. I mean, we're going to get more into this subject. So really bridging this world to get to and to facilitate our own journeys into true empowerment so that we can really show up in the world and actually have fun doing it with each other, with our families and community and in person with our groups. So that's one of the things that you and I are part of this co-creation that's happening together, Deborah. And I have to say it's really fun to work with you. And you seem to just be there, be present, be in it, and you actually enjoy the process. So it's inspiring for me. I wanted to, before we go, two other questions. We talked about fear. We talked about moving through fear. One of the things that have been since starting to make Tech Pack Your Power, this has always been in my mind, is I don't want to just put people into fear and leave them there. I don't want my net job or focus to be a negative effect of just bringing that awareness of the problem, and then what do you do with that? So it rarely happens now, but people have kind of accused me of just telling people about the fear side of things and just contributing to a general problem that way. I know you're also involved in advocacy activism in a very powerful way in Hawaii and in your online networks with us. So, can you talk to that a little bit in terms of, like, is there a necessary role of awareness and fear? And obviously, on the other hand, we don't want to go into this bubble of like just love and light, like you talked about before, right? So, help us to, if you have some more insight on this process, how can we sort of, be confident, I guess, and in the fact that, or in the fact that we are not just putting people in fear and leaving them there for a net negative result.
Yeah, such a good question and so important. I actually have a little story to share around this. I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and I was having lunch with another one of the presenters, and his issue was climate change. And my issue at the conference was 5G. Mm-hmm. And at lunch, we were talking about this very topic. We were talking about, how can we talk about these very scary topics and still be mindful about what we're doing, invoking fear in people and how to manage that. And what does that mean, from an ethical point of view, from an integrity point of view. And we're in the middle of having this conversation, and another presenter walked by, and for whatever reason, I looked up and hyper-focused in on the sleeve of this man's jacket, and he had a badge. Is that what it's called? Like an arm badge.
Sure.
On the sleeve of his jacket, and I just zoomed in on that with my eyes, and the badge said, "We scare because we care." And so I'm in the middle of this conversation. All of a sudden, I see that, and I'm like, "We scare because we care. We scare because we care." And I said, "Did you just see that?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "I have to go talk to him. Is that okay?" And he's like, "Yes." And so I follow this guy out. He was walking out of the lunch area outside, and I catch up with him. And I asked him about this badge that he was wearing on his jacket. And it turns out that he was one of 10 CGI computer, graphics guys that worked on the film Monsters Incorporated.
Yeah.
That's a Pixar, was a Pixar film. And the director made these jackets for all 10 of those guys and put that, badge on the arm, because the theme of Monsters Incorporated is we scare because we care. And I realized that that's the answer. The answer is when we're talking about these potentially scary topics, that we need to pay attention to our intention. And if our intention is that we're sharing these things because we care. If we're coming from a heart space, if we're coming from that place of, I care about you, I care about humanity, I care about what happens, that is what is going to carry the message.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the intention will carry it, in other words.
Well said. Thank you for that illustration. As we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you about one last thing. Now, one of the things I love about you is how you put, your perspective and knowledge into action, and you actually are walking this path in the world, and that's something very admirable. So you told me one time about how, what happened in Hawaii when you brought some information to someone in a position of authority, and they received it, and things shifted in a quick way. That was such an encouraging story when you told that to me. I'm just wondering if you could share that with our audience in closing.
Sure. So I live on Maui in Hawaii, and we have a community access television station here called Akaku, AKAKU, and they sponsor these, what they call salons, where they bring in presenters on various topics. And it so happened that our Maui County health director, it's actually a state position, but he's assigned to Maui County, Dr. Lauren Pang, was scheduled to do a talk on 5G. And so I got the announcement about this, by email. And the wording of the title was kind of as a question. It was like something like, is 5G dangerous or something like that? And I didn't know where Dr. Pang stood on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very curious about that. Plus, I wanted to contact him because I wanted his permission to pass out flyers at at his talk, because obviously there would be people there who are interested in the issue. And so I called him, and he answered the phone. And this was a few days before he was doing his presentation, and he said, "I'm working on my presentation right now." And I was like, "Oh, that's good." And then, we sort of visited, and I was asking him where he's at on the issue. And he said, "Well, there are pros and cons to 5G. There's good things and there's not so good things." And it sounded like he was, kind of middle of the road or undecided. And so I just, in that conversation, shared a couple of websites with him, with research, particularly about the health effects, since he's, Dr. Lauren Peng is an MD. He's our health director. And he was doing the talk as a concerned citizen, by the way, not in his official capacity. But I still wanted him to know about the research on the health effects. And so directed him to some websites. I think I directed him to the 5G Space Appeal .org, and I think maybe BioInitiative, maybe one other, I don't remember. And when I'm there on the phone with him, he actually pulled up the websites and started looking at them. And so then, our conversation ended, and he did give permission, by the way, for me to hand out the flyers. And so then when his talk time came several days later, I was very curious about how he was going to approach the topic. And what had happened is he actually took the time to read the research, and it completely shifted him in his perspective on 5G. And during his talk, he ended up saying that 5G is an experiment on humanity, and it's an experiment that's being conducted without our consent. And it's as if we're all being told by the government, you have to have this medical procedure done. It's mandatory. It's never been tested. We don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's supposed to be good for you. We don't know what the side effects are, but you have to have this done. He said that's what 5G is like. And he said that it's in violation of the Nuremberg Code, which is a code of ethics that was established after the human experimentation that was done in World War II.
Yeah.
as as part of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So there were points in his talk where he was visibly shaking. He
Wow.
was so affected by this. And I think it was because he was new to the information, and he was so affected by it. And then after the talk, somebody came up to me. This was, a colleague who I had kind of shared the backstory with. And he said, "Wow, Debra, this is such a good example of grassroots activism. One phone call,
Yeah.
and this person gets the information, and then it has such a wide effect."
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's an outstanding example of leading from that inner empowered intentional space, right? And just the connection that happens at a deeper level with the people that we're trying to reach, really, when we do that inner work. So I'm going to put you on the spot just in closing. I have no...
Like you haven't yet?
Yeah. I've noticed the power of a morning routine, or if doing certain things, intentional things every day. I find it's best in the morning. What are 3 things, if somebody's watching this and they're saying, I want to be more intentional in my life, and I want to give myself the time and to go within and connect with my inner senses. What are 3 things, quick things that anybody can do?
I think important steps to take would be, when you wake up in the morning, do not reach for your cell phone or your iPad or turn on your computer. Spend some time with yourself. We cannot love what we do not know. So if you want self-love that you mentioned earlier, you have to get to know yourself. So spend time with yourself, turned inward, and get to know yourself. Then if you are a meditator, of course, it's very good to meditate and simply, clear your mind. Then set a specific intention for the day, a very specific intention, and just one thing. Don't do the, universal shopping cart. Just focus on one thing for that day. And then in the evening, before you go to bed, or perhaps when you're, falling asleep, reflect on your day and revisit that intention and use that as the lens in which to view your day. For example, if your intention in the morning was joy, I'm just picking something randomly. So joy, I want joy today. Joy is my intention. I want to give joy. I want to receive joy. I want to be joyful. And so then in the evening, I would look back over the day through that lens of joy and see my day that way, see how it went in an evening review type of thing.
Excellent. That's really good. So I made notes for myself. So time inward, meditate, and set one intention for the day. And then the evening, you reflect on the day, you revisit that intention, and you use that intention as a lens to see your day. Maybe not to judge or guilt yourself, but just to kind of observe, right?
To understand your day through that.
Yeah.
Right?
Cool.
Yeah. Doing that review to see, okay, how was joy today? Where did it show up? Where didn't it? And just to observe these things.
Yeah. So Debra, where can people dive into your work more and follow you and contact you?
They can go to debragreene.com, and it's the short version of Debra, the long version of Greene.
With an E at the end.
Yes, Debra, Greene with an E.
So Debra, thank you so much for your time today. It's a pleasure to work with you. And I just want to take this moment to say, if you're watching this right now and you found value in this, you find value in the direction that we're going with intentional advocacy and going deeper, or in any of the other talks on the summit, please share the link. Share the link where people can watch it online. That's how we grow. That's how we reach towards critical threshold. We don't have a huge marketing budget. It's up to us all. So thank you for that. And Debra, thank you so much again for just your wisdom and just your presence and really just caring and walking your talk. That means a lot to me and to so many others. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Josh. A pleasure. Feelings are mutual. Can't wait for the next step.
Thank you.